Hello, 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 everyone. Good afternoon. Gina, Alex, I'm very excited for our conversation focused on equity today, but before we delve into it, I want to give a background as to what you both do. So Gina, we're actually going to start with you. Can you provide an overview of Upwardly Global's mission and how AI has been integrated into your efforts to support skilled immigrants and refugees?
Yeah, so Upwardly Global, we are a social impact nonprofit. We work with work-authorized immigrants, refugees, and asylees who were professionals in their home country, and we help them re-enter their careers. Somebody I was talking to earlier was like, well, why aren't these people plug and play? Because they're legally here, they have skills, and the reality is they face a number of barriers that limits their opportunities. And so what we do is we really start to look at AI not only as a way to enhance performance and efficiencies, but also as a way to transform systems. And so one of the systems we're most interested in terms of AI is looking at the employer system. So one of the things that we think of when we think about AI is how do we use AI to center equity into it so that we can start eliminating some of these barriers that prevent our communities from accessing opportunity.
Fantastic. And Alex, somewhat similar, can you provide an overview of AI for social good as the head of it at google.org and key milestones your team has achieved in advancing social impact through AI?
Yeah, so hi everyone. So google.org, what we're trying to do is leverage Google's innovation and research tools to make progress on huge societal challenges. And where my team comes in is really trying to work with organizations like Upglow and try and center the problems that they are solving and try and figure out from there what are the solutions that exist. And critically, not every problem needs an AI hammer. Right, so we are not AI solutionists going on there trying to figure out where is the nail that we. No. It's can we figure out what problems are we trying to optimize against, and then figuring out which tools can be helpful, technical or not, and where technology can be helpful and where AI can be a useful tool, working hand in glove with the nonprofits to help them either build their own technologies or be able to leverage the technologies that might be created at the company. And kind of where my team's goals are is how do we help accelerate and create the bridge between research and practice. So how do we help shorten the time frame from where there's a research breakthrough, whether emanating from academia or from within the company, and then most importantly, how do we help create the partnerships that are needed to actually drive that to scaled impact with partners on the ground.
Fantastic. And Gina, going back to you, focusing on the workforce. How does Upwardly Global ensure that AI solutions used for workforce inclusion are designed equitably and to avoid perpetrating the existing biases that we are all very aware of?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because there's a big conversation in AI right now that personalization is a way we're going to reach equity. Because if you can personalize the AI, then it can be authentic to you. But the reality is that's not the case. And when we do that, what we see is what we saw at Upwardly Global when we tested some career navigation tools off the shelf to sort of see would these be able to read our community's resumes when they have international work experience, international credentials, potential gaps in their CVs. And what we found was that the AI misidentified their credentials and skills 35% of the time, and it misidentified their work experience 20% of the time. And so the idea that this is something you can buy off the shelf and that it would be authentic to every user isn't actually accurate. So what we think importantly when you're thinking about equity is most tools are designed for the average use case. And that is because it drives the most business value. But if you're a community, if you're thinking of that bell curve that sits on the edges of that average use case, then the problems you're solving for are not necessarily the problems that these edge case communities face. Who it's being designed for as the user experience does not necessarily mean that these communities are represented. What data the AI is being trained on and learning from, and who is the human in the room that's also ensuring that this is all working accurately. And so for us, the who is really important, the design is really critical, and then thinking about what communities where we're trying to reach.
Using communities as the jumping off point for you, Alex, how has your team utilized AI to predict, for example, natural disasters such as floods, and what impact it has on these vulnerable communities?
It's a great question. So speaking of centering the problems that nonprofits face, I, for a long time, have worked in the humanitarian space. And oftentimes when I'm talking to large humanitarian aid organizations, think the Red Crosses, Give Directly's, International Rescue Committees, and I'd ask them, hey, in a disaster environment, so say post-disaster, what are the biggest problems that you're facing? And what they unanimously would say, it takes so much time to figure out where to try to channel the aid. There are technical solutions that could be helpful there, right? If you have a map with preloaded data on socioeconomic vulnerability, and then you overlay that with a model that helps detect which buildings have been damaged after a disaster, you now have, within minutes, a map of where the areas that have been hit hardest by the disaster that are socioeconomically vulnerable. Start there. That normally would take weeks to not, if not months, of door-to-door proxy means testing that these nonprofits now do not have to do because they have good enough first draft of, hey, if I have limited resources, let me start where their data's telling me I should go. But now, with machine learning-based models that are starting to either perform on par or even better than physics-based models for predicting some of these disasters like floods, you now have a lead time. So when I talked to these same organizations, said, hey, if you had a week's heads-up notice, that a catastrophic flood is going to come into an area that you're servicing, how would you like that information handed to you? What would you do with it? They're like, oh my gosh, for every dollar that we would spend on prevention and preparedness, we're saving on the order of 7 to 15 in recovery. So we could channel a whole much more of our resourcing to that preventative effort. And now you have the ability to, literally, we've created programs where you're giving people cash, giving vulnerable families cash directly in advance of floods that are in harm's way. Because what you hear from user experience research, we're talking to these communities and say, hey, do you receive early warning systems? And they're like, hey, either we don't receive an early warning system, which we can now solve, or they'll receive an early warning, but they don't understand it. We can solve that. The biggest problem is we receive an early warning, we understand it, we just don't have any resources to do anything about that. And that's where now, if you have these pipelines built, you can now very quickly just deploy cash, and you'll see the preventative efforts that these organizations, that these families are taking on, are just building that resilience that's critical in a world where these areas are going to continue to be hit time and time again by these disasters.
But can I just plug a hole in
Please.
that also? Because one of the other things is disasters end up impacting women and girls the most. And the reality is in a lot of conflict-affected or fragile states, women and girls don't have access to, an ATM or a bank account. And so, I think this is this interesting point around how do we think about equity in AI? And so that when we're talking about displacement, we know that actually one of the most vulnerable populations are women and girls, but also if they're the least likely to be able to access resources because they don't have these bank accounts, how do we solve around that? And is it an AI solution to your point, or is it another tech solution, or just another solution?
Well, great point, Gina. What we actually do is, in the lead up to these disasters, we have huge, our nonprofits will run huge bank enrollment programs. But what we also do as part of the design of the program is that we actually incentivize women heads of households to be the ones that sign up by giving them a larger lump sum. So say, hey, if you're a woman head of household, you'll receive twice the amount than if a male head of household were the one to receive that transfer.
Okay, so taking all of this, you work with funders predominantly, Alex, and you work for and run a nonprofit. So let's talk about collaboration on both ends, because this is about scaling impact at this point. So Alex, we can start with you. Can you elaborate on the role of collaboration in aligning funders and nonprofits, and how do these partnerships help to scale impactful AI initiatives for the long term? Because we want a sustainable solution, not just for the short term.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge issue that we see when we talk to other funders. When we even talk to nonprofits, nonprofits are competing for similar scarce resources that other funders are providing. So it kind of behooves us as funders to talk to each other and say, hey, what are you working on? What are you supporting? And can we complement each other's funding as opposed to duplicating? And especially when we're talking about technical projects, right? If you're funding 5 different organizations to create a very similar pest detection model, as opposed to funding them to work together, you then have 5 different models that are roughly doing the same thing, as opposed to one model that's good enough, that's going to be open source, because everything that we fund is open source and publicly available. And then organizations can build on top of that and customize to their specific users as needed. I think that's critical.
Same to you, Gina.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because every social impact or nonprofit right now is testing on what it can do around AI, but there is no value chain in the AI ecosystem that allows us to share knowledge, what's working, what's not working, so that we're not repeating failures and we're not repeating investments that we don't need to repeat. I think the other thing that's challenging is getting organizations to collaborate across sectors to be able to solve for similar challenges. So, for example, career navigation is huge for our community, right? So if you've, what jobs do you apply for? What jobs are you competitive for? Do you need to relicense or recredential? Do you need to upskill to be competitive? That's not just a question that our communities face. That's a question that many communities face, whether it's working moms who are returning into the job market, whether it's, a first generation African American family or student who's now graduating and trying to enter the professional market. But how do we then think about how do we come together as organizations to identify these challenges and then develop solutions together so that we're creating greater impact and infrastructure? Because I think the challenge is one nonprofit doesn't have a maximum ability. If you're not going to share that knowledge or those capabilities with other nonprofits, then you're really sort of marking yourself out in the space where other communities are not being able to benefit. And I think that collaboration piece is great. I think it's great that funders like Google are thinking about how do we do that and incentivize collaboration, because it's not very authentic to a lot of organizations. But I do think it's a different muscle. And I will say the other thing is as part of that, how do we co-create solutions together? And for me, having tech and social impact working together is really critical. But also because, if you want to ensure that your products that you're using are equitable, like a LinkedIn AI, you can be testing that with community partners like us to ensure that's actually working for our communities too, so that the way it's being designed is also ensured that's inclusive. So how are we as tech providers or as tech enablers thinking about how are we then also partnering with social impact partners to be thinking about how we integrate them and how we're designing solutions?
So if you had to give a couple bullet point solutions to that problem, would you say top would be incentivization or something else? And that can be to either of you.
I would say top is imagination.
Okay.
I do think a lot of organizations really struggle with an imagination, to think about how am I thinking of what AI can do to solve a transformative challenge versus a productivity challenge. And then I think an imagination around who else should be in the room that I should be thinking about collaboration with. I think part of it is enablement. As a social impact industry, nonprofit industry, we don't have a lot of tech savvy. We don't have tech teams, product teams in the same way. And so really being able to partner to help us understand what we can do together and taking those hard skill creation building on becomes really critical. So I'd say it's imagination, collaboration, and sometimes collaboration can be incentivized and sometimes it can't.
Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, to add on what Gina said, I fully agree that there's a positive imagination, but there is magic in bringing these stakeholder groups together. When we talk to nonprofit leaders, they are the ones that are most proximate to the problems and therefore most proximate to the solutions that they know work and will work for their communities. They might be relatively less informed as to the full gamut of what technology can do. On the engineering and product management, on the product side, or the technical folks at companies like Google, they have a really good sense of what the technology can do, but are relatively less informed on what problems do we optimize this against. Bringing those folks together, you have a really magic concoction of, cool, how do we actually start to talk about imagining the possible of uniting our forces towards addressing these critical problems? And then it behooves organizations like ours to not just provide funding, but what else can we provide to really catalyze this? Can it be compute resourcing? Can it be access to our volunteers? That's often some of our best resourcing. Can we actually provide you a product manager and software engineers to really serve as the spark plug for you to build where you need to build in service of your mission?
Fantastic. And moving on, focusing more on the success of what you both do. And Alex, I'll pose this one to you first. Can you discuss an example or two, however many you prefer, of how AI for social good has driven a measurable change in areas like healthcare, focused maybe on women and girls, wildlife conservation, or disaster response?
Yeah, I alluded a bit to some of the work that we've done in the disaster space, and just like the broad context here is like around the world, 80% of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So these are goals that every country signed up to achieve by 2030. 80% of those targets have either stalled or regressed. We've done research that shows that AI can be an accelerant and can directly impact 80% of those targets. In a world where we're regressing or stalling, that's the type of accelerant potential that we need to harness and put it in the hands of the people that know how to use it best to really make progress against these goals. When we talk to our grantees and we survey them annually on the projects that they're driving, and this is pretty robust across education to climate to health, the two stats that always rise up to the top: percent change in time and percent change in cost to achieve primary outcomes. The organizations across the board, thanks to introducing AI to the flows, achieve their primary goals, however they define them, in a third of the time at half the cost. That's that type of accelerant potential that we really need to start galvanizing to make progress and meet those goals.
Speaking of giving it to someone like Gina who knows how to use these tools, Gina, can you share an example of how Upwardly Global's use of AI has led to success for employers or job seekers in communities that you serve directly?
Yeah, so one of the things we did is we partnered with a tech company called HiredScore, and we built out a customized talent fetch. So this is AI for recruiting. And the benefit of this is that the AI capability, or the AI, scans a resume, builds a skill and task profile, matches that against job openings from our employer partners, and then automatically integrates into the recruiter's workflow by putting that in their inbox. And so it's a seamless process. We were able to test it to ensure that it was equity-based. And the reality is this AI was actually built with the intention of eliminating bias in the hiring process. It has 100% explainability, which is very rare for an AI capability, and it's ethical AI. And so we have found that it works wonderfully. So for our talent pool, they are surfaced twofold more often for open roles and skill adjacent roles than a regular talent pool that you would find from Randstad. So that's been pretty incredible in terms of seeing the success of when we can actually build AI centered around equity with the purpose of actually your job is to eliminate bias, and how it actually works.
And knowing that we have only a little bit of time left, let's focus on where we are now with challenges in AI in your respective fields and within the next decade. What are some ideas that are top of mind in addressing them? Alex, we can start with you.
I really do think this collaboration issue is one that I really want to tackle head on. I'm trying to organize my team around this DNA of how do we help collaborate, not just with other funders, but really bringing together the right cross-sector of organizations that are needed to collaborate on shared solutions. I think there's so much that's going to be done, that can be done, that's starting to be done in the health space, in the public health space, from disease surveillance to helping you leverage language models to help people stay on their patient plan, to a lot of work that you can do in the disaster space that I alluded to earlier. Like in all these areas, what I'm starting to see is time is of the essence. And these models are really helpful at providing potential early warnings, but early warnings untethered to early action is a missed opportunity. So the collaboration is going to be key to be able to capitalize on not just the creation of early warning systems that are helpful and fair and accurate, but then can we get that into the hands of the organizations that know how to do that best to then stimulate the early action that's needed to prevent the worst of the worst.
Gina?
So I was going to say speed was the one word I was going to use. So I do think AI is revolutionizing the workforce that we need in order to fill in and do all the things that we were just talking about. And the reality is work is no longer going to be the place where you go to do a thing. It's going to be a place where you go to learn, because we're no longer working in environments that are predictable and stable, where you can have a skill, apply that skill in order to create a repeatable process where you get a standardized result. Now we're going to have a workforce that is not just skills-based, but it's going to be capability-driven. So what we're going to need is investing in our education, in our workforce, in our organizational resilience as companies that is really revolved around how do we promote agile thinking? How do we promote creativity? How do we promote collaboration? And how do we build teams that can quickly revolve around an issue to solve for if AI is really evolving every 2 years?
Incredible. Well, Alex, Gina, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate our conversation so much. Everybody, round of applause for these two. Thank you.